Valorant's newest agent Gekko is coming to the game, and he's bringing new meta-defining abilities that'll change the way the game is played forever. He's a Mexican-American Angelino who controls a group of critters that each have unique tendencies called Dizzy, Wingman, Mosh, and Thrash. Let's have a look at each of them and go over how to use them in game. Gekko's signature ability is called Dizzy, and it is bound to E by default. Pressing your ability key will hold Dizzy in your hand, after which you can throw her. After throwing her, there is a 0.5 second wind-up time in which after she will make a high-pitched noise and start scanning for enemies for another half second. If she detects any enemies in her line of sight, Dizzy zaps them with plasma, which blinds them. Again, that's anyone caught in her line of sight, not the other way around. That means that turning away from Dizzy doesn't work. Opposing players have to physically move out of her line of sight to avoid being blinded. This flash is different from other traditional flashes, where instead of covering your screen in a bright light that makes you wish you were wearing sunglasses, it covers most of it in a blue goop instead. It also cannot blind teammates at all, meaning that you don't need to worry about throwing this thing in front of your team, just go crazy. Dizzy can be used as a tool for recon as well. When enemies are zapped with plasma, it makes a noise which shows you that there were enemies in Dizzy's line of sight. You can also see which direction the plasma was fired if you look at Dizzy when she does it. And the area that was zapped leaves a blue residue on the floor for a brief period, meaning that jumping around a corner to hide again probably won't be enough to stay hidden. After Dizzy is used, she falls to the ground as a globule that disappears after 20 seconds. The globule can be picked up just like an ult orb, and it makes a sound to indicate to anyone around that you're picking it up. After a short cooldown, Dizzy will be ready for use again, and you can pick her up as many times as you need in a round. Now that we understand how she works, here are some tips to how to use Dizzy effectively. The first tip we've got is to use Dizzy's wind-up time while she's behind cover so that she doesn't get shot and broken before she can start scanning. All you have to do is throw her from a little further around the corner or above smokes instead of straight through them. That way she can act more like a pop flash and is less avoidable by the enemy team. Secondly, throw Dizzy in an area where you're confident in being able to retrieve her without being spammed once she falls. Don't forget that if you throw Dizzy onto a site to reveal enemies but aren't able to enter the site and clear it out within 20 seconds, you're gonna have to go the remainder of the round without your signature flash ability. And finally, don't be afraid to throw Dizzy in after your team has already entered and are fighting. Remember, they can't be blinded, and it'll distract enemies at the very least if not completely blind them. Before I continue on with the rest of his kit, I want to quickly mention that we offer coaching and exclusive guides made by some of the best pros in the scene over on our website ProGuides.com. For just $8 a month, you can get access to all of that and more, so check it out if you're interested. Gekko's second ability is called Wingman and is bound to Q by default. This little guy gets equipped in your hand and can be sent running out in a straight line making scuttling sounds. He works a lot like a raised boombot, traveling straight and bouncing off of walls. Instead of exploding when near an enemy, however, he concusses them and reveals their position. On attack, if you're carrying the spike and send Wingman out using your right click onto a site, he'll begin planting it for your team. There will be a purple indicator on your screen when you send him out to show you exactly where it'll be planted when he arrives. If he's shot and broken while carrying the spike, he'll revert back into a globule and drop it where he was killed. So make sure to protect him well. And of course, if you don't want Wingman to go on his noble quest to drop the spike in enemy territory, you can always simply left click to opt for a stun reveal boombot variant instead. On defense, Wingman can be used to defuse the bomb the same way he can plant it. However, if he's pulled off the bomb for any reason while defusing, he immediately gets destroyed and reverts back into a globule. Now that we know how Wingman works, here are some tips. Firstly, you'll want to use Wingman's plant ability in combination with utility like a Sage Wall or Harbor Cove to protect him from being spammed while he plants, just like you would for a player. The only difference is, this time you have more players able to hold for him if the enemies try to push or stop the plant. Remember that even though a player's life isn't at risk when planting, the bomb can still go down in an unretrievable position, so do everything you can to prevent that from happening. The second tip we have is to use his plant ability to fake out opponents. Normally in a 1v1 or a 2v2, the bomb being planted is a sign for the defender to push to isolate a gunfight or kill you while you don't have your gun out. However, since you effectively have an extra teammate to plant for you, you have the opportunity to play in an unexpected angle while the bomb is going down and surprise any pushing enemies. It'll throw off traditional timings in clutch situations and will be perfect for big brain outplays. Thirdly, if you want to use Wingman to defuse the spike, you should first tap it yourself in person to get rid of enemy utility. Wingman is totally defenseless against enemy utility, so it's best to make them waste it first, then send out Wingman to stick the bomb once they're in that phase of jump peeking or trying to spam the bomb. Once they're showing themselves, just hold the angle and chop them down if they're trying to spam Wingman. Finally, don't be afraid to use Wingman just like a boombot if you feel it's necessary. Players are probably going to zero in on the fact that he can plant the bomb and might ignore this secondary recon ability. But it's still an extremely powerful tool for clearing out angles and making enemies vulnerable to a push. And that especially applies if you remember that you can use your little friend to first clear the area, then pick it back up, and then finally use it for a plant or defuse regardless. The more often you use it in a round, the more value you're likely getting out of it as well. Gekko's third ability is called the Mosh Pit, and it's bound to C by default. Mosh is a creature that can be thrown onto the ground to cover a relatively large area, like a massive molly. The area he covers will turn green and will be harmless for the first 3 seconds after landing. After that, any enemies still caught in the area will have a lot of damage dealt to them, capping out at a full 150 damage in the center of the Mosh Pit. It's a pretty straightforward ability that works very similar to a traditional molly, with the only difference being that all the damage is dealt at once after a wind-up period, meaning you could potentially escape without taking any damage at all if it lands on you. Mosh is the only one of Gekko's abilities that doesn't revert into a globule, and it will be simply used up if thrown. Here are some good ways to use Mosh Pit in your games. Combining Mosh Pit with a stun, fade seize, or astral pull is a very powerful way to use the ability. The large surface area means that being hit by any of these combination abilities while in the pit will almost definitely deal damage, if not guarantee a kill. Using the ability at the start of the round with help from a teammate can be an excellent way to secure that opening pick. The second tip for Mosh Pit is to use it to drive enemies out of any corners they might be hiding in. The large surface area makes it much more suited for the task than any traditional mollies, and it's more comparable to a breach stun for the area it covers. Areas like under Heaven on split A site and the left of A long on Haven can be completely covered to drive out the opposing players, where other mollies might be entirely avoidable while remaining in cover. Just throw the molly and get ready to tap heads. Finally, it'll definitely be worth learning some molly lineups for the Mosh Pit, just like any other similar ability. Whether it's used for post plant to clear out corners on sites, or to deny an enemy a plant, it's a powerful ability, and being able to throw it from a distance without risk to yourself will be a definite advantage. So it might be time to head into some custom games and get to work. Last but not least, we've got Gekko's ultimate ability called Thrash. Thrash is a fish-like creature that can be equipped with X as the default keybind. It'll effectively work like a sky dog and is manually controlled by the player. Upon left-clicking, it explodes and detains any enemies in a small radius for 5 seconds. For context, that's about half the amount of time a Killjoy ultimate detains people for. After Thrash is used, it reverts back into a dormant globule that can be picked up like an ult orb if done within 20 seconds. When it's been picked up, it can be reused after a short cooldown one more time in that same round, after which it simply disappears. It can be destroyed similar to Dizzy and Wingman, and turns into a globule when destroyed if it's the first time it's being used that round. So what's the best way to use Thrash? Well, the effects of hearing Gekko's ultimate voice line on the enemy team will be very similar to hearing a Ray's ultimate. The enemies will immediately split up and hide to make sure they aren't all detained at once. For this reason, it's best to use Thrash if you know that enemies are stuck in a certain area, like a corner that can be isolated from any teammates that might try to come and help. Another great tip for Thrash is to remember that he also gathers a lot of information as he travels through. If you spot other enemies while detaining some, don't forget to relay that information to your team so that they don't run into any undetained enemies eager to get free kills. The area where Thrash will thrive on is taking and retaking sites in particular. He can effectively scout out the area and render enemies completely helpless. And if you follow up on the ultimate and take space, you can use it again. So for that reason, don't be afraid to use the ultimate, even if it might not seem like the absolute ideal time to use it. If you don't get any detains with it, you've cleared the area to take it with your team, and you can simply pick up Thrash back up to use again later in the round. Think about it, if you use it once to take the site and once more in the retake, that is insane value, even if the first usage only resulted in enemies evacuating the area and playing retake. So there you have it guys, a complete guide on how to use Gekko. Do you think Gekko is overpowered in the current meta? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, like and subscribe for more guides just like this one.